NRL has successfully tricked you into thinking that concussion is the most serious threat to the sport. But that's not entirely true. And here is the real issue not being talked about. The NRL would have you believe that issues around concussion are new, that we really only know about them because of the work of Dr. Bernard O'Malu in the 2000s when he was looking at the brains of retired NFL players. We saw this dramatised in the movie Concussion. Dr. O'Malley's research was important, but we've known about the danger of concussion for well over 100 years. And a lot of the research across that 100 years hasn't been just about specifically concussion, but multiple impacts to the head that were subconcussive. So why does the NRL present the issue as being purely concussion related? And why do organised sports play down the dangers of more mild head impacts? For this, we have to go back to the 1870s, 1872 to be exact, at the West Reading Lunatic Asylum in England. Say that really fast. And it was there that they warned that repeated concussions could result in mental infirmity, moral delinquency, and other doctors called it traumatic insanity or traumatic dementia. So don't let anyone tell you concerns around concussions are a new phenomenon. We've known about them for over 150 years. Medical historian Dr. Stephen Casper has found that we've been having the same discussions over and over and over again across the decades. The sports industry, using affiliated and often funded researchers, will claim we still don't know that head blows in a sport like rugby league will contribute to CTE as the players get older or other neurodegenerative conditions. They will claim we need longitudinal studies with rigorous modern standards to confirm it. They then do these studies and then say the results are inconclusive, they can't confirm it, more research needs to be done, or that some of these players had issues like drug and alcohol outside their careers, which has contributed to their neurodegenerative condition. Now, if you don't believe me, we'll touch on that in a sec, and we'll look at the NRL's questionable tactics. But first, I want to tell you about my new Game Plan Pandemic Masterclass, which is running on the 25th of March, 7:30 Sydney time. Link is in the description. Now, if you're watching this after the 25th of March, you can still get the replay at the link in the description. So what are those tactics that the NRL has been using? Well, in 2022, they had a research paper from researchers at Newcastle University, and they conducted a study into former professional rugby league players and the prevalence of neurodegenerative conditions in that cohort. In that paper, they excluded 6 participants because they already had neurodegenerative conditions. They did mention this in the paper, but they didn't include those players in the results of their study, which, as you guessed it, was fairly inconclusive. How can you do that? How can you research the prevalence of neurodegenerative conditions in retired players and then exclude those players who have those conditions that you're researching for? And while they do this, thousands of kids and junior league players are suffering head impacts at games and at training where there is much, much lower levels of medical monitoring. They don't have doctors on the sideline, they don't have a bunker to remove players. Often it's self-reported and it wasn't the biggest issue. And that's because it's not. Ever since being punch drunk was coined in the 1920s, we've known that multiple subconcussive blows to the head is a problem in later life and can contribute to issues such as CTE. In fact, in 1928, a Journal of American Medical Association pathologist Harrison Martland identified that American football players were at risk of remote and sinister effects due to repeated minor head impacts. Let me say that again. Repeated minor head impacts. He didn't say concussion. Think about it like slowly chipping away at a building's foundations. You don't notice the cracks at first, but eventually those cracks join together, and by then it's too late. The building starts to crumble. And the danger here is that many of these players are suffering head impacts outside games. The vast majority of head impacts are suffered at training, where they don't have the bunker or an independent doctor. Now, I'm not saying that the clubs are lacking in a duty of care. It's just that there is no one specifically looking at a player who stays down a little bit longer, is a little bit dizzy after they cop a whack, like there is at a game. And it's these repeated subconcussive blows that are the problem later in life. Concussion itself is still a serious injury. I'm going to cover that in a minute. And that's mainly because it's classified as a minor traumatic brain injury. But don't listen to the NRL when they say these concerns are relatively new, that it's still a developing area. I have right here a copy of Rugby League Week from 1978. And you can see that headline. That's right. Concussion was a problem in 1978. In this article, Parramatta doctor Peter Manolaris said there were already concerns from club doctors about repeated head injuries, and that he tried to sit players for at least a week if they had suffered a concussion. So this isn't a new issue. 46 years ago, you had club doctors concerned about this and going to the media about it. Yet it was only in 2023 that the NRL actually introduced a mandatory stand-down period of 11 days. So in 1978, it's a front page concern. 45 years later, it is finally addressed. But this isn't the end of it, because there are researchers trying to find solutions that won't strip the sport of its gladiatorial nature. If we go down to Melbourne, we've got Dr. Alan Pearce, who is looking at blood biomarkers that can not only diagnose a concussion, but let people know when that player has recovered from a concussion. And that in and of itself is key, because Dr. Pearce's research has shown that a player's brain can take up to 28 days and in some cases longer to fully recover from a concussion. And every person's recovery is different for a concussion. Some players feel fine after a week, might feel fine after 2 weeks, but their brain may not actually be recovered. It's similar to a hamstring injury. You might feel fine after 2 or 3 weeks of rehab, but you get on the field and you try to accelerate to full pace or decelerate from full pace, and you probably set yourself back a couple of weeks because you haven't given your body the right amount of time to heal that issue. Now for hamstrings, we're lucky because we have scans such as ultrasounds to have a look at how the muscle is healing and if there's any extra blood in the area. And you've also got tests like Nordics and hamstring curls to see how strong the muscle is and to balance it against the non-injured leg. Whereas there's nothing that exists for the brain. For basically the entirety of history, we've had to rely on subjective tests for concussion. So hopefully something like Dr. Alan Pearce will have an objective test for concussion. But over in World Rugby and in the dark code, they're actually doing a little bit more. They're using smart mouth guards, and they've mandated them for the elite level this year. These mouth guards track the amount of force in a collision and prompt medical staff to remove a player to conduct a HIA if they surpass a certain threshold. It's a world removed from the subjective monitoring of the bunker with an independent doctor. Now look, something is better than nothing, but World Rugby here has clearly identified this as an issue and is taking probably the most modern steps to stop it. So are concussions or repeated head knocks the actual problem? Well, it's a little bit of both. Concussions present a serious and immediate medical risk to the player. Complications such as second impact syndrome, where you get a second concussion without recovering from the first, or associated skull fractures, they present a very serious threat to the brain because they can lead to swelling and even actual death. And there are recorded instances of second impact syndrome leading to death in junior leagues, both in rugby union and in rugby league in the last 20 years. Whereas they're seen as less serious, more minor head impacts have been shown to significantly contribute to the future development of neurodegenerative conditions. And this is because of the period of time that it takes to accumulate these knocks. Some players start at the age of 5 or 6, and it can just be a little knock here and a little knock there. And then they're going up through their teens and the impacts are becoming more and more severe. And then when they get to the elite level, well, we've seen those collisions. It's effectively 2 trucks slamming together. And that's the player's brain taking a lot of that impact and force. The game of rugby league is incredibly tough, and we don't want today's heroes developing conditions that significantly shorten or impact their quality of life after retirement. And interestingly, the average age of NRL players is getting older. So could this be an additional concern? Well, I'm not entirely sure about that. I haven't found any research looking at this as a specific factor, but if you want to know how old the average player is getting, you can click this video right here.